So, welcome to the Financial Strategist for Navigating Uncertain Times workshop. So, I know we have audience sign up from Singapore, Hong Kong, UK, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines. So, welcome all. And here we are saying hello to all of you from Singapore. So some housekeeping rules. This session is being recorded and we will send you all a replay later. And please make sure you remain mute and your camera is off throughout the entire session. So the spotlight will be on the speaker. And we're also going to have a very interactive workshop today. Please ask Batya any questions on the chat box anytime during the entire workshop. So hello. Everybody, for those who don't know me, my name is Sabrina Ho. I'm the founder and CEO of Half the Sky, a career platform for diverse talent. So today is my great pleasure to have Batya to run this workshop for us. So a quick introduction. So Batya is currently a partner at St. James Place Wealth Management in Singapore, and she has over 22 years of international banking and financial services experience. She was also the ex-CFO for Commonwealth Bank of Australia and holding global position in Sydney, New York, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. And actually, Batya is also a full-time working mother to 3 kids. We were just talking about Batya was having a birthday for one of his kids yesterday. And she's also passionate about empowering and educating women on financial well-being. So welcome, Batya. I will give the floor to you and make you a host.
Thank you, Sabrina, and good morning, everyone. I think I'm going to share my screen in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get the tech working. There we go. And we'll put that into full mode. Okay. We're in action. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here with you today. Talking about financial strategies, navigating this challenging time. Wow, 2020 has been a year I don't think any of us will forget. Who would have predicted on the 1st of January that we would be going through such uncertainty, such unprecedented time. But this is very similar to financial markets. There's continuous uncertainty, continuous ambiguity. And what we're going to learn today are some of these strategies and thought process, how we can navigate through life, navigate through challenging times, navigate through uncertainty, because this is not going to be the first time, and I'm sure you're all aware of that you have uncertainty in your life. So uncertainty is the only certainty that we know. And knowing how to live with insecurity is very part of security. So what this quote means is that there's always going to be uncertainty in life. And we have to prepare and factor that in to our financial plans and into our thought process. And to live with security, we have to be prepared to live with insecurity. It's all about preparing ourselves. So what we're going to learn today, we're going to learn how to deal with market uncertainty. We're going to learn some lessons learned from the US military. We're going to learn about what could you have done financially for COVID-19, to prepare for COVID-19. We're going to learn some of the important investment steps to follow. If you have investment in place, what are you going to do? If you don't have investments in place, what can you do? We're going to learn when is the best time to invest. We're going to find out about some common mistakes that investors make and how to avoid. And we're going to learn how to get the best return for your investment. So as Sabrina said, if you have any questions, please do ask them as I go along. I will be leaving time at the end for Q&A. But yeah, if I'm talking and you want to ask something, just put it in the chat box and I'll do my best to answer. Okay, so let's look at the first part. Lessons from the US military. So to navigate global instability, we're going to learn lessons from the US military. And back in 1991, when the USSR collapsed, the US military was so exercised by the challenges associated with these factors that they came up with an acronym called VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now this VUCA is actually applies very much the same to investment and saving. So when you live in volatile times, do you put everything on hold and say, look, it's volatile, there's uncertainty, I'm not going to do anything? Do you bury your head in the sand and hopefully wait for tomorrow is going to be a better day? No, most certainly not. Do you read the news? And I guess reading the news makes people even more nervous and it makes things investing so daunting. But VUCA is actually so important. And what I'm going to talk about with VUCA, how it applies to investment and savings, and how we can change our mindset around that. So let's look at volatility. Volatility is very much a part of financial markets. Values go up and values go down. There's uncertainty. COVID-19, Brexit, US elections, climate change. I mean, climate change is a big thing. This causes so much uncertainty. Complexity. These are factors that muddy the financial pictures. News in the press makes it even more complex. Look at negative interest rates. There's so much complexity when it comes to investments and savings. And finally, ambiguity. It's that feeling that unpredictable elements can cause. Are we going to become a cashless society? Where and where should I invest my money? There's just so much ambiguity. So when we look at VUCA and we look at investment and saving options, we're not sure what to do. Do we keep our money in cash? Should we invest in equity? Should we look at fixed income? What about robo-advisors? What about retirement planning? There's so many options. So like I said earlier, do you bury your head in the sand or do you tackle it? The best way to address VUCA is to adopt an anti-VUCA approach. If you equip yourself with the right strategic and critical thinking. Okay, so now we're going to think about how can we tackle VUCA. So let's look at VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Now let's turn that around. The volatility, let's look at vision. And I'm going to ask you all to do an exercise. I want you all to close your eyes. I'm going to close my eyes. All close your eyes and picture yourself in the next 20 to 30 years. Okay? Picture, where do you see yourself? Okay? Where do you want to be? What life do you want to live? Have a vision. Having a vision and goal is so important. Do you know that according to Morningstar did a research that people who have a goal-based approach increase their wealth by more than 15%. Uncertainty becomes understanding. Now that you have a vision, and you visioned and you pictured where you want to be in the next 20 to 30 years, you have a better understanding of your needs and your wants. You have an understanding, what happens if I save more and spend less? What happens if I live longer? Many things you start to think about once you have that vision and understanding. This then leads to clarity. Clarity of the life you want to live and the actions you need to take, which leads to the final point on agility. You have to be agile in today's world. You have to be resilient. You have to be flexible. You have to be constantly changing, adjusting, and adapting to cope with all this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So now that we've tackled the first part of some of the challenges, what could I have done financially to prepare for COVID-19? Now, a lot of people come to me and say, I don't have a financial plan. This is probably the worst time to be planning. And I say no, there's actually no better time than the present to come up with a very robust financial plan. So let's look at what financial planning is. Financial planning is setting, planning, achieving, and reviewing your life ambitions. Okay? And I'm really going to stop and say focus on your life ambition. Because it doesn't matter about what anyone else wants to do. It doesn't matter about what your neighbor wants to do, or your partner, or your colleague, or your sister, or your brother. It doesn't matter. I want you to really think throughout today's workshop about what's important to you and what are your life ambitions. Because financial planning is about achieving what you want to achieve. So what could you have done to prepare for COVID-19? So the first thing is understand your personal goals, objectives, and needs. What's important to you? What are you planning for? So anything in life that you plan for, you normally have a goal. What are you trying to achieve? Are you planning to retire? Are you planning to start a business? Are you planning to buy a house? What are you planning to do? All your objectives should be around that. The second thing you should do is you really need to understand the now. Where are you? Understand your current financials and understand what insurance you have, which is probably very, very important. How much money do you make? How much money do you spend? How much money do you save? This is your opportunity. How much protection and insurance do you have? Do you have sufficient insurance to protect you for health? Do you have life insurance? Do you need life insurance? If you run a business, do you have business insurance? Insurance is about protecting your needs. And I think during COVID, most people really thought vulnerable. And insurance needs became much more important. But it's really about understanding what you have and what you actually do need. The third step that people really need to consider during uncertainty is having a sufficient emergency fund. Now, what is an emergency fund? An emergency fund is a pool of money that you have on hand in case there's an emergency. As a rule of thumb, your emergency fund will be between 4 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. Let me give you an example. Say I spend $10,000 a month. My emergency fund should be between $40,000 to $60,000. This is money that I would keep in the bank as extra cash just in case something were to happen. Now, during COVID, there's a little bit of additional uncertainty. People are worried about losing their job, of being made redundant, of getting salary pay cuts. So what I'm advising people is hold a little bit more just to help you sleep better at night. Now, everyone's personal circumstances would be different. If you're single and you're in a stable job, then 4 to 6 months would be sufficient. If you're working for a startup and there's a lot of uncertainty, you'd hold a little bit more. If you've got a family to look after, I've got 3 kids. My emergency fund needs to be a little bit more because I've got to look after additional people in case I don't have any income coming through. So it's very important to understand that what your expenses are, going back to step number 2, so that you can plan how much you need to have in cash. Now, you shouldn't hold too much in cash. And we're going to talk about that a little later in the webinar. The next thing that you need to think about is ongoing review and available assistance. Now, some people would say to me, oh, I did a financial plan last year. I don't need to look at it again. No, that's not true. You always have to be reviewing your situation, reviewing your circumstances. And this is the time to seek assistance, whether it's seek assistance from a financial advisor, or if you're running a business, can you get some government grants? Or if you feel that your job is uncertain, speak to a mentor, speak to someone at work. It's not a time to be alone. And once you understand your circumstances, it's very important to take action. Okay, so now what we're going to cover next are what are the 5 most important investment rules to follow. And hopefully you've all got pen and paper and take some notes, because I'm going to give you, these are the 5 most important things that you need to remember when it comes to investing. Rule number 1, invest for the longer term. And I'm going to go into more detail shortly. Rule number 2, make sure you always have sufficient money in deposit to meet your short-term needs. Rule number 3, we're going to talk about inflation. Rule number 4, we're going to talk about how you need to diversify your investments. And finally, we're going to talk about your own personal financial goals and objectives. So let's go to rule number 1. Rule number 1 is invest for the long term. Now, Warren Buffett, I love quoting him, only buy something that you're perfectly happy to hold if the market shut down for 10 years. Okay? And Warren Buffett's mostly right. Investing should be a long-term decision. Okay? And what I say long-term, I say medium to long-term. I generally look 6-7 years plus, but ideally 10 years plus would be the best time frame for investing. Why? Because investing has a risk. Markets, as you have seen in today's time, are very volatile. They go up and down. So the longer that you invest for, the better the average return you can achieve over a period of time. If you say, look at your short-term goals and say, I want to buy a property next year, you would definitely not invest that money. That's 1 year, you would keep that money in cash. If you say, I want to start a business in 3 years, should I invest that money? No. Again, 3 years is too short to invest. Too much risk. Again, look at something safer or keep it in cash. But if you say, I'm planning for my retirement, or I'm planning for an education plan for my children, or I want to buy a property in 8 years' time or 7 years' time is okay. Yes, then you can think of investing. The longer you invest for, the better. As I said, it reduces the risk and gets the better average return over a period of time. Rule number 2, we spoke about this earlier, emergency fund. Make sure you always have sufficient money and deposit to meet your short-term needs. That an example, say we discussed earlier about your emergency fund, and say you spend $10,000 a month, you would want $60,000 as emergency fund, but just say you want to buy a property next year, you would then keep the deposit for that property on top of your emergency fund. However, Warren Buffett goes on to say that people who hold cash equivalents feel comfortable. They shouldn't. They have opted for a terrible long-term asset, one that pays virtually nothing and is certain to depreciate in value. Now this goes directly on to the next point, inflation. Okay? Don't overlook the impact that inflation can have on the spending power of your money. Inflation is real. Markets, they go up, they go down, but markets, when they go down, they always go back up again. With inflation, it permanently reduces the value of your savings. Now, the inflation rate for Singapore is around 3%. And every year, the cost of living increases. During recession, things kind of stabilize. But I know last month, do you know that the cost of groceries increased by 5% globally? Why? Because people were staying at home, eating more at home and spending more money on groceries. So the cost of groceries actually increased. Inflation is real. Let me show you some examples. Say you had $1 million sitting in the bank, okay? And we're going to look at the 3% inflation because that's what's relevant for Singapore. If you had $1 million in the bank and you left it there for 10 years and you did absolutely nothing with it, that value would decrease to $743,000. And if you left it there for 20 years and you did nothing with it, that value would drop to $552,000. That's a significant drop. The column in the right, that's 5% inflation, and some countries do have 5% inflation rate. So these numbers are real. Just remember, inflation is eroding the value of your money. What's rule number 4? Rule number 4 is diversification. Why is diversifying so important? Diversifying is so important because no one can predict which investments are going to provide the best return year after year. But there are two things that we can be certain of. Number one, the best investment in 1 year can often be the worst performing investment in the next year. Okay, so just because something did well last year, it doesn't mean it's going to do well this year. And the second thing to be certain of is by spreading your money across a selection of asset types, sectors, and countries, your investment will stand a better chance of achieving a more consistent return. And I cannot emphasize how important this is. The more you diversify, the better. Never ever put all your eggs in one basket. You know, a lot of people say, I love property. Property is great, but you don't want to just have property. Say you had 3 houses in Singapore and the stock market and the property market dropped. Then what would happen? You don't want to just have equity. You don't want to just have fixed income. You don't want to just have commodities. You want to have a very well diversified basket of investments. And like I said, across asset types, sectors, countries, fund managers, the more you can diversify, the better. I'm going to show you something very interesting. This came from Financial Express Analytics data as at 31st of December 2018. And just a disclaimer, this will show you that past performance is not indicative of future performance. I'm going to make it a bit wider. Yes, you can see that better now. So a lot of numbers on the screen, on a lot of numbers, a lot of boxes and percentages. And what does this mean? Okay, let's look at an example. We'll take let's take emerging market equities. If you can see here is the gray box. In 2014, emerging market equities were generating a 0% return. In 2015, where did it go? All the way down. Emerging market equities were giving negative 11% return. In 2016, emerging market equities were giving 8% return. 2017, wow, this was fantastic. 47% return. Look at that. But then, if say you would have invested in emerging market equities in 2017, and then 2018, it would have dropped, there you go, to negative 18%. This is showing you such volatility. Let's look at, say, US equities at the very top there, which 13%, dropped to 0%, 12%, 23%, and then up again. So what you are seeing is that asset classes don't perform the same year after year. So if you would have had a very well diversified basket of assets, hopefully not everything will be going up and down at the same time. Rule number 5, and I've spoken about this, but it's so important. Understanding your personal financial goals and objectives. So what should you consider? What are your investment objectives? Why are you investing? Everything you should do should have a purpose. What is your attitude to risk? Okay, very, very important. Are you a low risk investor, a medium risk investor, or adventurous risk investor? And these are things that really should influence what you invest in. You know, if you are a conservative investor, you would not invest in emerging markets. You would not invest in commodities. You would not invest in any one asset class. If you are an adventurous investor, you probably wouldn't invest in cash or fixed income. So it's very important to understand what is your, what I call your risk profile, okay? And make sure what you're investing is aligned with that. You need to understand your investment timeline. What are you investing for and what is your timeline? Like I said, if it's anything that is short term, you would not invest. But are you investing for your retirement in 20 or 30 years? Are you investing for your children's education? Are you investing to start a business? Your investment timeline is very, very important because your risk profile will adjust with your investment timeline. Now let me explain that a little bit further. Say I'm an adventurous risk investor. I'm investing for my retirement in 20 to 30 years, okay? I want to retire around the age of 55, 65. So I can start off as a high risk investor now because I know I've got 20 to 30 years to save. But the closer that I'll get to my goal, when I reach the age of, say, 55 and I want to retire at the age of 60, I will then switch to probably a more conservative portfolio. So the longer the timeline you invest, slightly more risk you can afford to take. The shorter the time frame of investing, less risk would be taken. You need to look at your right mix of investments and portfolios. You know, like I said again, diversification is so important. And the more you diversify, the better. And then continuing reviewing. You have to be consistent and continually review to make sure that your investments are still aligned with your goals, that are still working for you. Okay, so I have investments in place. What shall I do? When COVID hit, everyone started panicking, okay? And people were calling, people were selling, people were buying, people were acting irrationally. So I'm going to ask everyone, and you can put it in the chat box. Do you think that investments are logical, or do you think investments are emotional? Now, the left-hand side of the brain is logic, and the right-hand side of the brain is emotion. So if you want to all put in the chat box, what do you think investments are, logical or emotional? Everyone want to put in the chat? Don't be shy. There's no right or wrong answer. Do you think investments are logical, or do you think investments are emotional? So Sabrina said should be logical, but get emotional sometimes. Thanks, Sabrina. Anyone else? Okay, well, I guess we'll move on then. Investments are actually, should be logical, exactly like Sabrina said, but are very emotional. And during COVID and during a lot of uncertainty, people were acting emotionally. Now, the best advice that I could give to anyone during this uncertain period is to avoid emotional investing and avoid making hasty investment decisions. Okay, whatever you should invest in should be aligned with your financial goals and objectives. If COVID hit and you had investments, the worst possible thing you could have done was to sell. Why? Because markets dropped, but markets recovered very quickly. And if you have a long-term goal, you need to stick to that, okay? Whatever you plan to do, you need to stick to those goals. You shouldn't be swayed by any short-term news or any volatility. That is the worst possible thing you can do. So let's look at this roller coaster in front of us. You know, when markets are going up, people are excited, they're feeling, they're thrilled, they're optimistic. Markets start to drop. People are in denial. They start to fear. They are panicking. They're feeling very despondent. And markets pick up. There's hope. There's optimism. People feel happy. They feel relieved. Okay. Okay, this is life. But what you need to try to do is avoid the emotions when it comes to investing. With all of my clients, when they invest, I make sure that I understand what their objectives are. So when COVID hit, none of them panicked because they knew that they needed to stick to their original investment goals. So please avoid any emotional thinking. I know it's hard, but it's always important to think about and stick to your original goals and objectives. Okay, so people say, if I don't have investments or financial plan in place, what can I do? Is it the right time to invest, or when is the best time to invest? This is a question I get all the time. People ask me, Batya, should I invest today, or when shall I invest? And the answer is there's no best time to invest. I wish I had a crystal ball. Okay, but no one does. No one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So there's a concept that's called time in, not timing, is the key to investing. So it's only natural to be concerned about short-term fluctuation. The only certainty is that it's impossible. It's impossible to know how markets will move. What we have seen is the sharpest falls and the largest gains are often concentrated into the short period of time. If you try to time the market to avoid the falls, you are most likely to miss the gains. I remember back in 2019, that was 2019, 2018, sorry, 2018, 23rd of December, worst day in markets that year. 26th of December, best day in markets. So we were talking about 3 days. Again, this year, the markets dropped significantly in March, picked up in April, and then skyrocketed in May. So it was very difficult to time and predict that. Let's look at this graph in front of us. And this is sourced from the Financial Express Analytics. So if you would have had $100,000, okay, and you would have stayed invested over 20-year period. So you have $100,000, you've invested it for 20 years, you don't take the money out, you would have reached $321,000 if you would have stayed fully invested. However, if you would have tried to time the market, it's like, let me try pick a day, and you would have taken your money in and out, and you would have missed the best 10 days, you would have only achieved $162,000, around up. If you had tried to time the market and you were taking your money in and out, and you missed the best 40 days, you would have gained $50,000. So the best thing to do is stay in the market. Don't try time it. You never know. No one knows. No one knows what is going to happen. Why does investing make sense? As you can see from the graph, markets always go up and go down. And the best days are often very shortly concentrated with the worst days in markets, which we saw very much this year. March 23rd was the worst day in markets this year. 6th of April was a fantastic year. 21st of May was a phenomenal year. The markets always go up and down. I love this graph because I remember most of these time periods. And what you're seeing is that throughout history, throughout every crisis, let's call it, every crisis has been different. Okay, I will say that COVID-19 is different to the subprime loan mortgage issue. COVID is different to September 11th. COVID is different to the Asian currency crisis. However, what we do see and what we have seen is that after every crisis, markets do recover. You can see Black Monday 1987, Asia currency crisis in 1997, dot-com peak. I remember that so well in 2000. I was living in New York then. I love the story is that I was living in New York in 2000, and I remember going to the Hamptons in 2001 and seeing all these empty houses. And what had happened was there were all these tech startup companies that had started doing well. They started building these houses, and then they ran out of money. So they would abandon all these houses. September 11th, I remember that very well. Again, I was in New York. Market just absolutely crashed. Subprime loan problem, 2007. China slowdown in 2013. Lehman Brothers back then, 2008. These are all very historical events that we've seen over the past 20 years. But what we've seen, as you can see here, is that markets always do recover. So investing does make sense as long as you stick to your goals and invest in the medium to long term. The key to successful investment is not to avoid risk entirely, but to find the appropriate balance of risk and reward to help you meet your investment objective. It's really about finding that balance and what is going to work for you. I love this quote by Tony Robbins. The quality of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably deal with. Okay? Again, always uncertainty, but you have to be prepared to deal with a proportion of that. And having a good plan is the best way to tackle and prepare yourself for that uncertainty. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the common mistakes that people make when investing and how to avoid. Number one, panic selling when worried. Okay, this is what I spoke about earlier. The worst thing you could have done when COVID-19 hit was to start panic selling and selling off all your investments. Why would you want to sell when markets are down? That's the time when you really want to buy. You always want to buy when markets are down. You want to buy cheap stuff, don't you? So selling when markets are down is the worst possible mistake that any investor can make. Failing to diversify, putting all your eggs in one basket is a very, very big investment mistake. You know, some people think, I spoke to a lady recently and she goes, I don't need to invest. I've got 6 properties in Canada. I was like, oh, really? That's not very well diversified. Just having too much of anything, like I spoke about earlier, is a high risk. Number 3, tinkering too often. Okay, buying and selling. Okay, that is not what investing is about. Investing is pretty boring. It's about being patient. It's about riding out the storm. People who think that they're smart and can predict what's going to happen, actually not. People who buy and sell, no, that's day trading. Leave it to the professionals. But investors should really not be buying and selling. They should be patient and ride out the storm. Number 4, buying because of hype. Buying because of what you read in the newspaper. Don't do that. Please don't believe what you read in the press. 90% of it is not true. Buy because of what's important to you. Buy because of what's aligned to your values. Buy what in terms of in line with your risk profile. Don't buy because of hype. Number 5 is failing to rebalance. So what rebalancing is rebalancing your portfolio to what your original investment strategies were. So investments and markets change all the time. And what people forget to do is rebalance their portfolio to what their original strategy is. Very important to do that at least on a 6-monthly or annual basis. People are too reliant on home market. I hear it all the time. I only want to invest in the UK if you're a UK resident. I only want to invest in Singapore because I know I'm from Singapore. I only want to invest in, you know, if you work for a technology company, I only want to invest in tech. No, that's not what you do. Never rely just on home market. Again, the more you diversify, the better. Trying to time the market. Okay. Never try to time the market. No one knows what's going to happen. The best thing you can do is stay invested. Trying to select sectors and markets, it's very tricky. You know, again, this goes back to diversifying. Don't try invest in one sector. The more you diversify, the better. Currencies, love this one. Currencies is very tricky. And no one can predict how currencies are going to move. No one. I worked in banking, and our chief economist never got the currency predictions right. So if he couldn't get it right, no one can. What's the best thing to do with investing with currencies? And to invest in global companies. Let me give you an example. If you invest in, say, Facebook is a US company. Do they derive all the income from the US? No. They derive, I think it's 40% only of the revenue from the US. And the rest of the revenue is derived from other countries, from globally. So it's always best to invest in global companies that have exposure to global currencies. Never try to predict how currency movements will work. And when it comes to investing, always try and invest in the currencies that you have on hand. Hedging is very, very expensive. It can be high risk and should be left for professionals. So I do not encourage individual investors to hedge. Number 10, thinking cash is a safe haven. Cash is not safe. Yes, definitely have your emergency fund, but anything in excess of your emergency fund is not going to be working for you. Think about inflation, think about your goals. And finally, thinking past performance is key to choosing a manager. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. We saw that in our diversification chart. Last year was a phenomenal year. Just because a fund manager did well last year does not necessarily mean that a fund manager is going to do well this year. There are so many other elements that will go into play to making sure that you choose the right fund managers, right funds. And past performance is not necessarily the best indicator. Okay, so how do you get the best return for your investment? Anyone want to know the $1 million question, the $1 million answer? How do you get the best return for your investment? Go back to our 5 rules. How do you get the best return for your investment? Number 1, invest for the longer term. Make sure you always have an emergency fund. Don't underestimate the impact of inflation. Diversify your investments as widely as you can and understand your own personal financial goals and objectives. Please, everyone, remember these rules. They should help you. Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. Investing takes time, patience, and discipline. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open up for questions. There is a QR code over there. And if you can pick up your phone, and it's a quick little survey just to get some feedback on today's workshop. I host many other workshops, so if you want to attend, you can leave your details. Also, everyone who attended today's workshop, you're more than welcome to come and see me, have an initial complimentary consultation. So you can use the QR code, you can put your details there. If you don't want to be contacted, that's perfectly okay. But if you do have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. I will be more than happy to help. So now let's open up for some questions. Any questions? Don't be shy. We can give you a few minutes to think. Oh, good, thank you. You've got a question. Any views on how we can leverage unavailable tech to maximize investing? Any views on the effectivity of robo-advisors, for example? thank you. That was a great question. Thanks, Anna. Robo-advisors. So I'm personally a massive fan of technology. Okay. I think with artificial intelligence, I think with automation, we have to embrace technology. So yes, using artificial intelligence can help review and perform analytics and look at how things have been done in the past. But there is an element of using a robo-advisor that is still early days. And when people say to me, should I go see a robo-advisor? I say, well, if you have a problem, if you lose your job, what would a robo-advisor say to you? Oh dear. Or, you know, a robo-advisor is not going to give you empathy. Okay. If you see a real life person, one of my clients lost their job. The first thing I did was I went through my LinkedIn profile. Who could I connect them with? How could I help them? How could I review their strategies? So there's a lot of additional value that a human can add that you cannot get from a robo-advisor. But I think you should try use a combination of both. If you can use the advances of technology, use the benefits of analytics, use a company that uses robust technology, plus the value of face-to-face advice can help. All right, hope that answered your question. Next question, what are your thoughts on cash is king during a recession in which we're experiencing now? Good question, and I hear it every day. Cash is not king, sorry. Yes, goes back to the example, emergency fund, yes, have your emergency fund, but inflation is eroding the value of your money, okay? You've got $1 million, in 20 years time, it will be 552,000. So you need to have the right amount of cash for emergency and for your short-term goals. Probably even more important that you make your money work extra hard for you. People are living longer, you know, and people need to plan for the future. You really do. So you really need to make sure that extra cash on hand is working for you. What are my thoughts on Bitcoin? That's the next question. Thank you, Joanna. Very good question. Bitcoin is high risk, okay? Bitcoin is not regulated, all right? A lot of people would say to me, should I invest in robo-advisors? Should I invest in Bitcoin? Should I invest in gold? If you want to invest in it, maybe a little bit amount of it, but it is very, very high risk. Unless you're a very, very high risk investor, I would definitely not put all my money in it, okay? It is very hard to value. So there's very hard to get a valuation. And like I said, it's not regulated, very volatile, very high risk. If those are your objectives and that's what you want to do, go for it, but not all your money. Just be aware of the risks and reward that are related to that. Everything that you invest should be towards your goals and objectives and should be aligned with your risk profile. How much investing capital do I need to have a chat with you? Good question. Everyone on this call can have a confidential chat with me. You do not. So there's a big misconception that you have to have millions of dollars to see a financial advisor. No, you don't. You do not need millions of dollars to see a financial advisor. I have clients who invest $1,000 away a month. I have a client who's putting $100 away a month for her children's education plan. Yes, and I do have clients who've given me $1 million, but it depends on your personal circumstances. So no, you don't need to be wealthy to see a financial advisor. A financial advisor will help you get clarity and give you solutions that are suitable for you. Okay, more questions. I think we have some more questions coming. So we've got 5 more minutes, so we do have more for questions. What should we be doing in the next 6 to 18 months? Okay, so every single person on this call, the answer will be different because it all depends on what your personal financial goals and objectives are. But let's talk about the market in general. Yes, there is certainly going to be continued volatility for the next 6 months. The US elections are going to have a very big part in that. Who knows what's going to happen with the US elections? That does influence markets. But markets will go down and markets will go up. So there will be continued volatility. If your investment goals are for the medium to long term, you should not be swayed or be concerned about the volatility. You should stick to your goals, stick while you're investing, and ride out the storm. Markets are still down and they have improved significantly. So markets, they dropped in March and they've improved, but they're not necessarily at the same levels as January. So actually it is a good time to invest because you're still getting in at levels that are below the January highs. What we are seeing is that this next year, even though we will be entering a recession, or we probably are in a recession right now, markets will be improving. Markets are forward thinking. Markets have already priced into the market investor sentiment. We're going to be seeing probably a lot of mergers and acquisitions, where the large companies are going to be buying some of the smaller companies, a lot of the startups. There's going to be a lot of opportunity coming up in the future. So hopefully exciting times ahead. Yes, economy is going to be tough, but again, think about your objectives, think about what you want to achieve, and stick to your plan right out the storm and avoid any emotional investing. Any more questions? What can we do? Action we can do financially starting from tomorrow. Okay, very good question. I love that. What action can we do financially starting from tomorrow? Okay, so the first, I'm going to give you 4 things to do. Write down your goals and your objectives. Okay, think about this. Close your eyes and picture where you want to see yourself. Have that vision. A vision is so important. Do a budget, profit and loss and balance sheet. Understand where you are now. Okay, understand what your surplus is. Understand how much cash you have sitting in the bank. Understand what your emergency fund is. The next thing you can do is then start coming up with some numbers of how you can reach your financial goal. Okay, if you have investments, go and review them. If you have insurance, make sure you're reviewing your insurance. Make sure it's still relevant for you. Make sure it's protecting your needs. So these are very important steps that we should be doing, and you should be constantly reviewing that. So tomorrow, all of you think about what you want to achieve, understand where you are today, plan for the future, and make sure you have something robust in place to meet your needs. Any more questions? Okay, I think I'm going to head. I think we're actually on the dot.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Batya, for your time today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So again, we have a lot of resources to share with you on our platform. So make sure you sign up on halfthisguyasia.com. It's completely free. You will also receive exclusive event invite like this one, job alerts, thought leadership content, and resources. Again, it's completely free. So we also have 2 more events coming up in August. We have an exclusive event with JP Morgan on how to empower yourself through technology tomorrow, and a workshop on managing stress and anxiety during COVID-19 next Tuesday. It's completely free. So make sure you sign up on our event page. So thank you so much, Batya, for your time today, and stay safe, everybody, and take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.